Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Merck. I'm the pipeline manager for the American Petroleum Institute in our midstream and industry operations group, and also representing API on the full pipeline safety management system industry team, which we have are working jointly with 5 other trades, as well as the chair and co-chair, Angie Kohler and John Hill from industry. So I want to welcome you today. We got a great turnout. I think we're upwards of close to 150 people that have registered for the webinar. And really, for us as an industry team, the webinar is the webinar series that we have in place and that we're doing throughout the course of 2019, similar to what we've done the last few years, is really to provide and support pipeline operators along their journey of SMS. So we've got a lot of resources out there, and you can go to our website for that material. We've been doing trainings such as these, again, over the last few years to really help and support you at various stages that you are on the journey. So today's webinar, as the title, Practitioners and Program Managers, indicates, is really for us as an industry is a little bit more advanced. We held a beginner's webinar for those who are really early in the journey or not started or just getting started back in May on the 21st. And really we were looking to tailor and target today's webinar to those who are actually in the implementation role or as a program manager to help and help you understand, and we're focusing on a few key areas, some areas where there have been some challenges and how to help give you some best practices to work through that. So with that, Aaron, if you can next slide. The speakers for today are representatives from the industry team, starting with clearly myself, and then I'm going to turn it over here shortly to Angie Kohler with Colonial Pipeline. Angie's the VP of Operations Services and the Chief Risk Officer, but more importantly, for us as an industry team, she chairs our pipeline SMS industry team. She took over this year, replacing Sean Lyons with Marathon Pipeline. Also, Shannon Gutterson with Trans Canada. He'll be speaking as well on why and how we really identified the challenges we wanted to discuss today. And the importance of some of these key areas as we talk through them today. David Toth with Kinder Morgan, Justine Brubaker with Marathon Pipeline. They're going to get into specifics in some areas of risk management, operational controls, and how they've gone about it, and some best practices around implementing SMS in those areas. And then Aaron Duke is going to talk about the evaluation tools. And then Bobby Liu, next steps, and a wrap-up. This is a quick snapshot of the agenda. We're going to give you just a brief overview of the SMS landscape, some of the things we're facing here in D.C. Through pipeline safety reauthorization, but the overall general landscape around SMS. Some focus areas for the industry team, and Angie, as the chair of the team, is going to walk you through those priority areas. Hit on some of the fundamentals just to kind of ground us all and level set before we start talking about some of the challenges of implementation and giving you some of those examples of how we're making it real as an industry. And then we'll work through some of the more advanced tools and resources that Aaron Duke will talk to you about, and then wrap up with the mentorship program and some next steps toward the end. So before we get started, based on the number of operators and companies that we have on the line, I wanted to go through our antitrust guidelines before I turn it over to Angie. It's API's policy to comply with the antitrust laws. API staff and member company representatives should observe the following guidance. No discussion or forecasting of prices for goods or services provided by or received by a company. No sharing or discussing any company's confidential or proprietary information. No discussion of any company's specific purchasing plans, merger divestment plans, production information, inventories, or costs. No sharing or discussion of specific company compliance costs unless publicly available. no agreement or discussion regarding the purchase or sale of goods or services, no discussion of how individual companies intend to respond to potential market economic scenarios or government action, and no disparaging remarks regarding specific vendors, products, or services. Although I don't anticipate us getting into any antitrust issues, if you do have concerns, please raise the concerns with the operator, and she'll let us know. So with that, Angie, if you're ready to go, I'd like to turn it over to Angie Kohler, the chair of the Pipeline SMS Industry Team.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate everybody calling in this morning. So first of all, let me start by saying how exciting it is that we have over 100 participants on this call this morning. When this started a few years ago, it was a dream of industry and PHMSA and others to have this kind of participation across industry, and to see it coming together is really exciting. So as Dave mentioned, the point of this call today is to really try to start making it real for our operators. That was kind of the tagline last year. It can't operate as a piece of paper and an RP. It's up to us to make this real and make it work for our organizations. So one of the ways that we want to go about doing that is providing these types of webinars as a training platform to help those across all types of our industry operators to figure out the best way to implement the SMS. So current landscape-wise, Dave alluded to the support behind Pipeline SMS. NTSB, I was actually on site at Colonial last week and had several questions about how SMS works. They're heavily and highly engaged in making sure that this SMS platform works as well as they've seen it work in other industries, airlines, for example. So NTSB is very supportive. PHMSA is also supportive of the voluntary nature of SMS as well. They would like to see this work from a voluntary standpoint. Obviously, that would change if they don't see that they're getting the type of support that they expect from the industry. And again, that goes across liquids and gas. We are seeing some scrutiny by certain members of Congress anticipating that we should have safety management systems regulated across the industry. As an industry team and through the trade associations, we feel strongly that it should not be regulated. It's really hard to regulate a safety management system, and we're concerned that if it is regulated, that it might undermine some of the kind of integral nature of doing the best that we can as opposed to meeting a minimum regulation. So we're working to make sure that we can keep progress there. But it's up to the operators to make that successful. So we need to be able to pass the red face test going into people like PHMSA and NTSB and Congress to say, our operators are really jumping on board, they're really making great strides, and we're doing this as an industry without regulation. So again, kudos to you guys for calling in, and I would encourage you to help us with other operators that you know that might not be as advanced as you are, getting them on board so we can continue to tell this story. So Dave mentioned that we have a pipeline industry team. The industry team, again, is across liquids and gas. We have about 30 members and an additional 10 members that are reflective of the trade associations and trade association groups. So when we got together early this year, we wanted to focus on ways that we could help our operators implement an SMS. So we came up with the 4 pillars that you see on the screen. And these are really the areas that the industry team is committed to for at least this year, probably next year. So the first way is increasing industry participation. So we want ways, I mentioned the need to make sure that all operators are participating. We want to put together ways that help make that possible for our operators. We also want to continue the external engagement, so making sure that we're aligning with NTSB and PHMSA and Congress and others, communicating our mission, our vision of zero incidents across the industry. The third pillar is why we're here today, provide ongoing support for operator journeys. So this webinar falls directly under training and education. Again, making sure that that we provide you with the mechanisms to help make it real within your organization. And then the last pillar is simply the governance of the industry team. Again, making sure that we have the backbone and the framework to make it successful. And then my last slide, the fundamentals. So I've mentioned a couple times making it real. One of the other kind of taglines that I like to use within Colonial is don't make it a thing. An SMS or a management system should just become about how you manage the safe operations of your company. So this model or this diagram that we have on the right talks about the plan, do, check, and act model. The planning is really around risk management, and then there's the things that you do in your organization to keep you safe, the way that you check up on those things, and then acting if you see that there is something that needs improvement. So again, it should just be how you do these things within your organization, making sure that the elements that are within 1173 play out through all of the ways that you manage safety. One of the things that we're really keyed in on from an industry team is making sure that it's flexible and scalable. What looks right for Colonial Pipeline isn't going to look right for a 10-person operator. It has to make sense for your organization, so we want to give you the tools to be able to do that. And I already mentioned the plan, do, check, and act cycle. I also would be remiss to mention or not mention the need for a strong safety culture. None of this works if you don't have a strong safety culture within your organization. And essentially, we believe that implementing these things through the recommended practice will help support the strong safety culture to give you the movement and the momentum that you need as you're implementing. So again, fundamentally, don't make it a thing, just make it how you do your business and make it work for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron Duke with API. He's going to walk you through kind of the next section, and then we'll get to hear from some operators on how they're making it real for their organization.
Thanks, Angie. For the next couple minutes, I'm just going to spend a bit of time talking about the maturity model and then also some of the tools and resources that are available out there on pipeline-sms.org and available to help with Journey, Pipeline SMS Journey. So back at the beginning of sort of the industry initiatives and to support the RP 1173 requirement for operators to establish a method to evaluate the growth and development of the PSMS, the industry team put together a model to help operators meet those requirements of the RP and evaluate the maturity of their PSMS. This maturity model, it's in place to give operators a method to which they can measure how comprehensive, systematic, and integrated their pipeline SMS elements are throughout the organization. It's a tool, it's giving an objective way to determine the strengths and weaknesses of an operator's pipeline SMS personnel and processes that support the safety management system. And in the spirit of the Plan, Do, Check, Act model that Angie was mentioning, it provides a means to identify areas of the pipeline safety management system that need improvement. There are some definitions in RP 1173 that the industry team used as a reference to develop the model, and that includes there is a definition for maturity and maturity model in RP 1173, so this stays true to what the RP requires and its fundamentals. And it really is meant to be a tool to assist operators, and it forms the basis for the evaluation of processes used within the industry tools. So this also, all the tools that we talk about will later on in the session, this really does form the basis for some of the evaluation processes and the method for evaluating progress. It is important to say it's okay to have your own model. This really is meant as a tool to help operators look at progress, tie it back to the RP. But if you have your own tool, that's fine too. It's still a way to evaluate maturity that would be in line with the RP. The tool also provides a set of data points to demonstrate and track progress toward implementation. You'll see the model has 5 levels. The first 3 relate strictly to conformity of the management system. and conformity with the elements of RP 1173, that the system is in place, documented, and processes are being used throughout the organization. The two higher levels, 4 and 5, relate to the effectiveness of the system, and that includes consistent performance of the processes and ensuring that performance is being assessed and improved, with level 5 that being the demonstration that the SMS process performance is leading to real improvements in safety performance. It's important to recognize that an organization, you may go back and forth up the scale as their PMS matures, but it's also okay to go back and forth between levels as continuum improvements are realized. Over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, the Pipeline SMS industry team has been working very hard on tools and resources to establish, to help operators with their journey. The website at www.pipelinesms.org was revamped last year to help improve functionality, and this is really the home base for all these tools and resources. Early on in the industry team worked to establish some booklets that provide education around the importance of safety management systems, what RP 1173 is, the elements, how to implement pipeline safety management systems. So the third booklet does provide some guidance around strategies for implementation of a pipeline SMS. There's also a whole list of tools out on the website as well that can help operators. There's the SMS maturity model that we just talked about. There are 2 tools for planning and implementation to do gap assessments. There's guidance around how to use the tools and how to conduct evaluations and assessments as part of the planning and implementation processes. APGA has worked on a fit-for-purpose tool for their members to help them help them identify gaps and then plan to close those gaps. As far as I'll be talking about advanced tools later on in the session, but the evaluation tool is out on the website as well to do the effectiveness assessment and to evaluate implementation against the maturity model. There's guidance on the website around peer-to-peer sharing practices to share best practices that can help really advance PSMS maturity and implementation. And then finally, there's the voluntary third-party assessment program that I'll be talking about later. As we do these workshops and webinars, all of the information from these webinars and the workshops is available on the website as well. So any of the presentations and the sessions from the 2017 and 18 workshops and webinars is also available. So now I'm going to pass the presentation on to Shannon Gutterson from TransCanada, and this is going to focus on the 2018 annual survey results and then some information from Shannon's perspective relating to challenges of implementation.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate the handoff. As Aaron had mentioned in the presentation, this is really a journey in terms of going with the management system and trying to implement one. And one of the things that we do through API is we conduct an annual pipeline safety management survey that has about 17 questions that focuses on a company's commitment to safety, their safety culture, how they align to the elements of a safety management system, what potential gaps they might have, and how they're prioritizing their improvements to their safety management system. The results of these surveys are reviewed and analyzed to determine how API can support industry members with further development of their safety management systems. As well, we try and leverage existing members' implementation experiences to try and share our successes or what's worked well for us in the past. And again, it's all meant to help us along the journey of aligning to a management system. Next slide. So what I'm going to focus on in the next 2 slides is really just show you some results from the annual survey where it kind of focuses on a couple of the key questions on implementation. And this here is a snapshot of where our various operators that have contributed to the survey are focusing their implementation efforts for their safety management system. So really, there's not a surprise that there's a focus on leadership and commitment, as this is foundational to make a safety management system work within a company. As well, there are a number of elements that are viewed as a priority with risk management, operational controls, incident investigation, evaluation, and lessons learned as the next priorities, which makes sense given that if they are improved, it helps set up the implementation of other safety management elements and should improve an operator's safety performance. this result also highlights the range with which our operators are at in terms of their journey, and it speaks to the different stages that our different members are currently at, or where they're seeing potential efforts to improve their safety management system. So again, this is something that's really come up in the last few years in terms of trying to get along or more or less just get grounded on where we're at with our management system approach from a safety perspective and where we actually see getting traction. Because management systems do require a fair bit of effort, sometimes it's easier to look at focusing on certain components of the management system to really get it established and improve, and then get into that cycle of continuous improvement. If I could get the next slide. So this here is another snapshot of really highlighting where our operators highlighted as the most challenging elements of the management system to implement. And you can see there's a range of responses, but based on the survey results, we landed on the two topics of the two elements being risk management and operational controls, with management of change being grouped in with the operational controls. So hence, when we were developing this webinar, these are the two elements that we decided that we'd do a bit of a deeper dive on. So as we go through the presentation, other members will go into a little bit more detail on operational controls, and another person will go into a little bit more detail on risk management. But we just want to give you a little bit of background on how it is that we came to land on these topics for this particular webinar, and where we're seeing the information from the annual survey that we do complete. So we do encourage companies to continue to fill out the survey, because it does help us prioritize how we can help industry improve where we're at and share our experiences. If I could get the next slide. So based on those two questions, really what we wanted to focus on is risk management and operational controls. And before we get into the deep dive for those, I was just asked to share some of the experiences I've had in working with management systems. Just as a quick background, I've worked in the management system setting for more than 20 years, so I've had different exposures to whether it be a quality management system, health and safety management system, or an integrated approach. But for these elements here, these are some challenges that we have, and I'll just take a quick moment to just summarize some of the challenges that I've come across. First of all, with risk management, one of the big challenges is really dealing with the scale of risk. And really what I'm getting at here is that there's a difference in how an enterprise risk is from a frontline risk would be identified, evaluated, and managed. Essentially, an operator needs a scalable process that allows staff to follow the basic steps of risk management. The reason is a risk to the whole company may require more resources and tools to adequately manage than a hazard that a frontline employee will manage when conducting maintenance tasks on a piece of equipment. But both are equally important and need to be managed to ensure that we achieve our goal of creating a safe workplace where everyone is able to go home, and that we protect the public. As well, in my experiences with risk management, something that's also very important is the need to align our language to make it easier for staff to understand the risk and hazards that have been identified, and that they understand the controls that are in place to help manage the risks that they may be exposed to. So again, one of the key things here is just really making sure that we are speaking a similar language when trying to establish our tools, and talk the same language to make sure that we are on the same page. In terms of operational controls and kind of getting a little bit into management of change, some of the challenges I've come across is really the concept of an operational control can be challenging for staff to wrap their mind around. Essentially, an operational control can be a procedure that outlines how staff conduct a task or their work, or it can be a piece of equipment that manages the risk or manages the risk associated with the hazard that the piece of equipment poses. As well, the level of detail that your operational controls go to is dependent upon the culture of your company. Some companies prefer a more detailed process steps, where others outline guidelines and requirements that must be met. Therefore, the really important part with operational controls is really striking the balance of what the culture will accept. And this is, again, where it's important, where you tie in with your safety culture to make sure that you actually build the documentation, the details that you need for your staff to execute the tasks. As well, when it comes to management of change, the big challenge is to make sure when it should be used, and to conduct an adequate risk assessment to understand the impacts of making a change, and the proper level of stakeholder engagement to make sure that the process is effective and efficient. And it's trying to strike that balance. But those are just some general observations I've had myself in my experiences. But at this point, I'm going to be turning it over to David Toth from Trans Mountain, so that he can do a bit of a deeper dive on his experiences with operational controls.
How's everybody doing today? What we're going to discuss is Kinder Morgan's products pipeline. We have 4 business units. but we're going to focus on products pipelines, OMS, which is our operations management system. What you have on the slide here, you have teamwork, beginning, processing, success. The reason I bring that up at the front is because at the very end of all this, we're going to talk about how it works through the different challenges of implementation. One of the important factors, of course, is, in 2015 when API 1173 was announced, it's not an emerging discipline, right? It's something that's an endless journey for safety, performance, and improvement. There's a considerable amount of value in the collaboration with regulators, industries, yourselves, other leaders, through different mediums such as this webinar or workshops to reach that agreed and transparent strategy on how to improve safety culture, not in my business, your business, but everybody's business, right? You can go to the next slide. What you have at this graphic is the processes to establish for us, Kinder Morgan Products Pipeline, how we operate and which is arranged in a centralized framework, right? We've talked about that with 1173, that we have that one framework, and this shows how it goes back and forth. What we do is we ensure that all our core activities are done consistently and the most important and effective way to achieve measurable results, right? The one thing that Angie talked about and everybody else has talked about is, all this will remain a work of progress, right? As new hazards and challenges confront the industry, new personnel join our workforces, new regulations are introduced, it's constantly changing. That's why it's a work in progress. Next one. What we have here is an overview of operational controls. We all know about these. We're not going to do a deeper dive into every single element, but we're going to talk about challenges and implementation into about 6 or 7 different elements of this. So as we look at the operations, management, emergency response, as Shannon talked about with management of change, system integrity, and of course, use of contractors. We can go to the next slide. So the first thing I want to kind of dive into is constructing processes to ensure consistent results, right? For us, we had to kind of look at ourselves and say, okay, consistency allows measurement, right? So if measurement isn't performed consistently, how can we measure the effectiveness? Or the consistency creates accountability. Are all accountable for the goals, objectives, and targets? Consistency maintains the message. Is it consistent from leadership to serve as a model? So what we did for Products Pipeline is we created an OMS steering committee. It's chaired by our Chief Operating Officer, and all departments actually have a seat at the table, no unintended consequences. They're part of the approving process for our MOC. They help develop the goals, objectives, and targets. We actually communicate those to all Kinder Morgan employees for the U.S. and Canada. So we're very transparent that way. And we also ensure that we communicate it all the way down from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. Another element on here is the analyzing the organizational readiness and system status, right? Wow, that's a lot of stuff, when you look at it. So what are we really looking at? The mindset and understanding of the culture, right? So for us, we kind of step back and we're kind of like, we need to ensure that all employees understand their role. I think that's a very important part, and how their job and their personal choices impact the management system, the SMS or OMS, and also ultimately Kinder Morgan. So we also strive to ensure that the employees not only just support the OMS as a program, but it also strives for continuous improvement. So we evaluate policies on an annual basis. We look at engineering standards on a annual basis, and all employees that are affected will actually go through this. And as far as the system status, we kind of looked at it from Kinder Morgan Products Pipeline, and our OMS utilizes goals, objectives, and targets, right? This is the driver for the day-to-day performance of our SMS. This creates kind of a constant effort of improvement, consistency, it really which leads to our enhancements and policies and procedures, or even the creation of new processes and procedures. And then ensuring personnel are competent. So what we did is we created a new e-learning CBT or LMS for just KMPP OMS, right? So we want to make sure that all our employees are aware, all our upper management is aware. It's actually driven from the top down. What we look at is to make sure that all employees, to guide the process in training creation, right? So it came from employees, and we actually was the driver for our OMS. We also looked at, set expectations and documented the process. If you're going to do training and the competence needs, of course, you have to document it, but also what are you gaining from it? So what are those employees coming from when they give they take the training? What do they get from it? So when we go out to the field on different self-assessment, if compliance codes and standards goes out there and does some QA/QC, that's one of our drivers. What do? We talk to them about it. We want to make sure that our compliance documents are actually posted. We have our OMS EHS statement that's signed by our president. We want to make sure that everybody understands it. And also, we believe that it's the driver of our safety culture. It's one of the biggest ones for us. Each employee should have an expectation to become an expert. I think we all agree. And they also want to be the safety expert at that safety specific job that they do have. So if the employees aren't competent, we're going to have that disconnect for them wanting to be that expert. They don't have that buy-in, and they don't have that safety mindset. And lastly on this slide is the safety, the self-assessments. We have internal issues, as far as resources, knowledge, and how requirements and audit against and the competence, right? So when we look at it, when we first sat back, we need to do safety assessments. Do we have the resources? Do we have the knowledge? Do we know the requirements against, the regulation, or they're looking against the RP? How are we really going to put this together? For us, we actually go through a annual process just to do 1173, and also for Z662, and also for the OPR with the National Energy Board. We actually do departmental self-assessments. We do OMS self-assessments, because we really think that we need to find those gaps. When you're finding the bad, you're finding the good. So you kind of communicate the findings, through the steering committee and through the others, learn and improve, and of course, understand the performance relationships better. How does each department work with one another, and how does it all fit under the management system? So what we looked at also is safety culture indicators. We touched the base on the safety culture survey, but what are the indicators, right? So upper management with our steering committee matures out the safety culture indicators prior to the safety culture, because this is what upper management feels the safety culture is right now, right? And the safety survey actually tells us what it is. It's really derived from the NEB, safety indicators, the INGA safety culture survey, and also internal indicators. What we looked at is, what are our current perceptions? What are the perceptions would be desirable? What decisions are people currently making when we look at our tracking and trending? What experiences are shaping the current perceptions, decisions? What behaviors would be desirable and they're necessary versus actual frequency of occurrences when there's incidents? So we actually look at it, so we can look at leading and lagging indicators, and also do a performance measurement on it. It's a great way for leaders to actually demonstrate that safety is an overriding value for priority, because it's something that they take ownership through the steering committee. It's all director level, and they want to know what's really going on, and this is what they really want to happen, because there is driven the drive for safety. Using technology, I know it's part of 1173. I know it's not a shall statement, but it's something that we use all the time, right? So we evaluate it from the field down. So we look at something, we want to make sure that it also works for the field. We updated our MOC process just recently. We totally revamped it, which is a great process now that we have now. I think everybody's just fallen in love with it. It's just a little more streamlined. And then, of course, the the external and outsourced processes. What we look at it is, the ability to transform continuous streams of data that we get, and turn it into basically something that we can actually make decisions that are positively impact results. But I think it's very important that, you got to look at the technology, from SCADA all the way down to ensure that it enhances the pipeline safety. For this one, safety culture survey, right? We talked about it a little bit. You respond anonymously, opportunity to deliver candid feedback. It's one of those things that can kind of fight against upper management that, might tend to focus on an incident, right? You're actually looking at, they can actually demonstrate the reality of the company's safety culture. And what we did is we took what the safety culture survey did, what our indicators are, and kind of describe ourselves as how an organization behaves when no one's watching, right? I think we all talked about that more times than not, but we all believe that. Safety culture, is expected, expressed and observed via individual groups and attitudes and behaviors, as well as organizational. Again, the big one is identify the good, the bad, and the ugly. Compare the safety cultures versus the safety culture survey. Once we get the survey back, we actually, at the steering committee level, we look at what the survey said, what upper management felt, and that really identifies opportunities for us to improve. And of course, through the KPP OMS steering committee, we listen and clarify, concerns to the surveys, identify underlying issues and interests, exploring possible options, collecting general data and emergency trends, and of course, recommending systematic changes. And then the last slide is just a basic conclusion. For ourselves, the best results are obtained in a joint systematic examination. We build a strategy on how to implement, not through increased processes and procedures, rather through identifying proven opportunities for improvement. And of course, foster a culture through success, through working together towards goals, objectives, and targets. That's really big for us, and I think it's made a big change for us because everybody in the whole business unit understands our goals, objectives, and targets, and we're all working towards the same element. Safety cultures are not uniform. I know Angie talked about that, and there are opportunities for improvement, right? There always is. And then also the biggest one I always want to express is gap analysis. Look in the areas of vulnerability in your operation. If you're not doing the gap analysis, I know there's the PSMS tools, or if you have your own sort of tools, but I think if you're doing gap analysis to understand some of those opportunities for improvement, I think you'll really see a change in your management system. And I think, Dave, are you going to open it up for questions?
We were going to continue, I think, through the next session with Justine Bruce-Baker from Marathon to present on some more implementation challenges from Marathon's perspective.
Okay, so risk management. We have three things that we're going to discuss over the next couple of slides. Firstly, the purpose of risk management, which I think in some organizations can get a little bit lost, but we're going to go over the positive aspects that you can benefit from a risk management system. We're going to look at how risk management fits into our system, into our safety management system here at Pipeline, and we're also going to review a couple of the challenges that we've faced over the last decade that we have been running a risk management system in Pipeline. So here on the slide you can see the ISO 31000 definition of risk management. Essentially, the purpose is to assist the organization in achieving its objectives whilst reducing losses as much as possible and effectively and efficiently allocating resources to the tasks that we do to ensure that we make those objectives. The purpose of a risk management system really is to provide a systematic and logical decision-making process. It means that we can overcome personal biases and that split-second decision-making that we all as human beings tend to have the ability to make, and ensure that we are applying information and data and understanding across the board to the way that we work in order to meet those objectives. We can go on to the next slide, please. So this diagram was put together to demonstrate how risk management fits into a safety management system. Essentially, you can see that there's lots of different pockets of information where we are getting our data from and the understanding of what we do and how we do it, how it's executed, and the effect that it has on the overall system. Risk information decisions are essentially nestled into the middle of that for the reason that they draw from each of those processes, truly cross-functional, and take that information and then apply it back to all of those processes. So we're kind of consuming and generating information that assists each of the other elements of the safety management system. The safety management system is cyclical, and so is risk management. Essentially, risk management needs to be flexible and respond to the ever-changing circumstances. It requires continuous improvement and periodical review. It very much follows the same PDCA cycle that continuous improvement focuses. You are never truly done with risk management. It is one of those things that when you think that you have ticked off all of the things in your to-do list, you need to go back, review new information, and see how that changes your approach and your management structure. How this fits into our EMS system, we have a process within Marathon Pipeline that requires processes to conduct annual surveys of internal audits, if you like, where individual process leaders conduct a couple of different tools where they can answer questions and judge the performance of their processes based on a predefined schedule of scoring system. And risk management is part of that process. Process leaders can go through and answer set questions as to how they feel that they are performing with risk management in their process. So what they're being asked to define is there a risk to the business from your process? How much risk does your process manage, and how well is it managing through the analysis of metrics from incidents and audits, learning from past events, external events that could potentially have an impact, the execution of operational controls, etc. So in terms of 1173, we have a couple of key focus areas. 7.1 is very generally asks for focus on asset and risk management processes. 7.2 is to do with data gathering. Data is a very integral part of the risk management process. 7.3 again is to do with information and risk identification and assessment. 7.4 reviews the requirement for risk prevention and mitigation, and 7.5 is about periodic analysis. We can have the next slide, please. Okay, so at Marathon Pipeline, we have a structured approach to risk management, and essentially at the bottom of that, we have our minimum requirements. This is our bedrock of compliance and conformance. So we have categorized conformance and compliance as being the same thing. We aim to make sure that we are always within conformance and compliance of any regulatory requirements and any standards that we are aiming to be compliant with. So in this case, we've got CFR 195 and 192. We have process hazard analysis and PHR, so process safety stuff, API 1173 and RC 14001, and we have internal corporate standards that Marathon Pipeline have to also conform with. And so that is our very bare minimum risk management. In addition to that, we build upon project development. We are currently using risk management to assess the merit of conducting specific projects and assist with our budgeting process. So this allows us, in the true spirit of risk management, to effectively and efficiently allocate resources to the projects that are most needed to be done in order to manage the threats that arise within the work that we do. And at the very top, you can see that for process improvement and cost competitiveness, we are utilizing risk management to really reach the pinnacle of aspiration, which is to consistently and continuously improve processes that the organization has been doing for an extended period of time. So in this section, what we're saying is it's not just good enough to sit back and say, we know how to do this. We have to consistently review what we're doing, and with regards to new technology and new methods of working, over time, improve those processes to make sure that we're doing it the most effective and efficient way that we can at that point in time. We can have the next slide, or actually the challenges I don't have a slide for, but I do have some comments on challenges. So risk management can be a tricky thing. I think that it is not something that historically has been a must-do item. It's something that's very much a nice-to-do item. So essentially when we all get really busy, sometimes we just start making snap decisions. We start to just say, I, as a human being, am really good at my job. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't, so I know how to make these decisions. And we make decisions quickly, and often those decisions are correct. So when we start to step back on risk management is when we start to think about things that potentially we could be missing. And so the nice thing about risk management is because it's a systematic method, essentially the protection is that you're not necessarily missing something and you're not going to get surprised at the end of the day. So that's challenge number one. Human beings are human beings, and we all occasionally have more faith in our own abilities than is necessarily there, and do stuff that doesn't necessarily benefit the business as a whole because we believe that we are right. So risk management really is there to protect that. Another challenge within a risk management system is that the terminology that we use can be alienating to people who do not understand the risk management terminology. And one of the problems with that is that we use words that are used frequently by people who don't understand what we're talking about from a risk management perspective. So there can be a lot of confusion. The difference between frequency and likelihood often comes up. To somebody outside of a risk management system, they might not think that there's much difference in that, but I can assure you that there is. Also, some of the terminology that we can select when we're writing processes and procedures can drive pretty poor behavior, and I think that that's the same within most elements of a safety management system, not just a risk management system. But if you don't choose the right words, you don't get the right behavior. So one of my favorites is having risks that are intolerable, means that people will go out of their way to avoid carrying out operations that have intolerable risks. But the truth is that most risk can be managed, and therefore it's not necessarily intolerable. One of the challenges that Marathon Pipeline has worked with recently is a feeling of trying to eliminate all risk. Well, that's not technically possible to eliminate all risk without going out of business. So the way that Marathon have really been doing that is by applying expensive control measures to manage risks that perhaps didn't really require that level of control over them. And so the challenge and the opportunity at the moment is to identify areas where we can replace over-exuberant control measures with control measures that are appropriate to the situation. And following on from that, so not understanding all of the controls that we have in place, whether they're effective or redundant. Over time, safety management systems and risk management systems can build up layers of protection that don't do anything. but they're there, and we do those things because it's the way that we've always done them. And so this top-level aspirational element of the risk management really assists us to identify things that we're doing that we don't need to do. Really what we need to do with it, if you're a risk management professional or you are overseeing the risk management element of the safety management system, is be flexible, be approachable, be mindful that the terminology that you use is not necessarily terminology that everybody is familiar with, and provide risk management as a service to individuals. It shouldn't be a stick that people are beaten with because of regulatory conformance. It should really just be something that assists people to make better decisions. Okay, so I can hand you over now to Aaron Duke.
So what we'd like to do now is break to take, or just pause for a minute to see if there's any specific questions for Shannon, David, or Justine on implementation challenges. So operator, if you could help with that. Thank you. Then again, this is Aaron Duke from API, and I work in our global industry services area on programs, and I've been working with the Pipeline SMS industry team on some of the advanced tools and the assessment program that's been in development for the years. So I'm going to talk about, spend the next, again, few minutes talking about the some of the advanced tools that the industry team and API have been putting together to help operators that are advanced in their maturity, so reaching sort of the conforming level of maturity and looking to evaluate their progress and the effectiveness of their pipeline safety management system. I'm going to specifically talk about the evaluation tool and the voluntary API third-party assessment program that is in place. So the advanced tools that have been put in place that are meant for again, for organizations and operators that are moving along the maturity and getting advanced in their implementation are the evaluation tool and the third-party voluntary assessment. There are other tools that have been developed as well, the implementation and planning tool and the peer-to-peer guidance, and those are all also available on the website, but I'm going to specifically talk about the advanced tools. So the evaluation tool was put together, again, at the direction of the Pipeline SMS industry team as a tool to evaluate implementation of and effectiveness of the PSMS, Pipeline Safety Management System, at a high level. The tool is in two parts. There's an audit matrix or an assessment matrix that allows an operator to look at the elements, the sub-elements, and the requirements of RP 1173 and do an assessment of their system against those requirements and the maturity model and make an evaluation of that. There's also an effectiveness evaluation tool, portion of the tool, that compares an operator's performance with key performance indicators across industry. There's a guidance document as well that talks about the evaluation process, an explanation of the key performance indicators and how they're used, how they're developed, and then how to select the implementation levels and do an evaluation of maturity for the scoring to demonstrate and evaluate progress. I'll be talking in a little more detail about the evaluation tool in a moment. The third-party voluntary assessment program has been put in place to help support the RP requirement for audits and evaluations. When we were building out the assessment program, we wanted to make sure that our process and product protocols were consistent with the industry tools. So we took the evaluation tool, the process guidance document, and built out from there. We did conduct a pilot, and one of the things we found from the pilot, one of the big learnings, was that we found that some of our process requirements and what we were doing with the assessment program weren't consistent with the actual industry team tools, so we've kind of revisited that. And again, I'll talk about that later as part of the details on the voluntary assessment. We've also, one of the inputs to development of the assessment program was a successful API program that was being done for refineries under our process safety site assessment program. Again, that was an industry development program for refineries that helped them benchmark their performance and look at areas for improvement in key process safety elements. The objectives of the assessment program really are to drive continuous improvement, give an opportunity to share good practices, and then also benchmark progress against the industry maturity model. So looking internally for benchmarking as well as industry benchmarking to demonstrate progress. So looking at the evaluation tool, which is an Excel-based tool with a bunch of spreadsheets that are built out of the implementation and planning tool. So you'll see, if you've used the implementation and planning tool, you'll see a consistent sort of format moving to just more expansive evaluation. Really, there's three big questions that the evaluation tool is trying to help the operator address. Did you build it, and are you doing it? So that's the implemented level at level 3, where the management system is conforming with the elements and requirements of RP 1173. And then, are you doing it consistently and improving it, which is the sustaining level of level 4. So that's all covered in the audit matrix. And there's different tabs within the tool. Again, I'll show you those in a minute that help you get to that evaluation of did you build it and are you doing it, and then are you doing it consistently and improving it. The third question is did it make a measurable difference in your performance? So there's an effectiveness evaluation tab that contains normative KPIs for each industry segment. That's gas transmission, gas distribution, and hazardous liquids. There are KPIs, 4 KPIs in each segment that are built around publicly available information that's out on PHMSA reportable information and some OSHA information. The normative KPIs then are scored based on your average performance compared to industry average, and they're scored. So to get that level 5 improving score can only be achieved with good performance versus your peers, and then also full implementation, say a conforming level of implementation for the pipeline safety management system. There are also contained within the tool, there are also quite a few informative KPIs by industry segment that can be used for context, can be used to look at different parts of your pipeline safety management system or your operations generally to see how you're performing when compared to industry averages. Again, those informative KPIs are all built around publicly available information that's reported to PHMSA. So just to get some details, again, the evaluation tool is a set of spreadsheets that has an implementation tab that's meant to evaluate level 3 and up to level 3 and level 4 on the maturity model. What we've done is instead of doing a requirements-based checklist, we've rolled the requirements up into element and sub-element type questions within each of the 10 elements of RP 1173. Really, this is to encourage a process-based assessment or auditing approach to draw out information and not get into that, avoid like a checklist type of mentality when you're going to doing an assessment. We want to avoid binary answers. We want to get information to really evaluate pipeline safety management system implementation around the elements and sub-elements. There is also the big question, the score, and there's guidance around what the scoring and selecting the scoring level based on the maturity model. And then there's also a spot where an organization, an operator can record their comments, their findings, their observations, their evidence around those different elemental questions. The 50 big fat questions, what we call them. Now, each of those questions has all of the requirements embedded within it. And those are also in the 234 shell statement, a conformance checklist to help as a tool to do an assessment or an audit. So that's the implementation tab, or also what I've referred to as the audit matrix. Then there's the evaluation tool part of it, which is the effectiveness tab, which contains the normative KPIs, the key performance indicators, to compare yourself against industry averages. And you can see examples on the slide showing the gas distribution, gas transmission, and liquids transmission KPIs that have been established for the evaluation tool, again, based on data that's all collected through industry. There's also some top-level KPIs that are like automatic deductions from the scoring based on the significance of those KPIs, and that includes incidents with PHMSA fatalities and non-fatal incidents with PHMSA injuries. Within that, the guidance document explains more details about how the scoring works and how the tools to be used to help an operator do their evaluations. The second advanced tool that I'm going to talk about today is the third-party assessment. The program is currently in development, and really what that is about, the goal or the heart of the program is to provide a standardized, objective approach to evaluate implementation and progress against the maturity model. Really what we're trying to do here at API, we're trying to do something different, and the selection of the word assessment or the move to assessment from audit is deliberate. We don't want to get into we want to go beyond a conformance sort of exercise where we're just evaluating conformity and providing that type of information to the operators. What we're really trying to do is put together a competent, diverse team of industry pipeline subject matter experts in safety management systems, and some pipeline operations, and give them a chance to go out and evaluate the pipeline safety management system, and then share opportunities for improvement, share best practices, and reinforce positive aspects of implementation. And finally, there's an objective evaluation of maturity that's done to give an operator a chance to test their own evaluation and their audit processes, but as well then to benchmark. So benchmarking across an organization, looking at different programs, different areas to benchmark internally, as well as then to benchmark against industry peers as the program expands. We have worked to try to stay consistent with the spirit of the RP and maintain it as a flexible and scalable operation that will apply across all liquids and natural gas pipeline industry. We've standardized the process, again, leveraging our own learnings here at API with the successful refinery program, but we also do offshore safety assessment programs. We do assessment programs and audit programs with manufacturers and service providers in all parts of the industry, and we've used various learnings from all those different programs to develop a standardized process. Of course, the details of the tools and the reporting and some of the process details, of course, come from the RP and the industry tools as well. But we qualify and train our assessors. We've developed an assessment training program for the assessors built around RP 1173, and again, our process, the industry tools and protocols. Then we go through a contracting and a preparation process between API and the operator, where the operator will share some high-level information with the assessment team that will lead into the assessment planning phases. The planning phase includes development of educational tools for the operator, as well as a pre-site visit, pre-assessment visit to talk about the details of the planning. And then, of course, there's the on-site assessment, which is the meat and potatoes of this whole program, where the assessment team will head out to the operator's headquarters or base of operations, plus then field sites to verify implementation. And that will be based on the discussions up front in the planning, where the operator, the assessment team lead, and API discuss the scope, what will really add value to the operator as far as covering field sites, validating that information out in the field, versus just going to a headquarters to review documents, records, and interview personnel. And then finally, at the conclusion of the assessment, there's a closing meeting where we talk through the assessment team's findings and their observation opportunities and reinforce those positive, and then we provide report deliverables. And some of those deliverables include the assessment report, which highlights the key practices and good practices and highlights of the management system implementation, provides observations based on the assessment team's experience with safety management systems and pipeline operations, and then also will identify opportunities for improvement related to the implementation of RP 1173 and meeting the requirements. There's benchmark information provided in the assessment tool That includes the maturity level and then the key performance indicator data. There's also the experience share with the assessors, where the operator personnel that are participating in the assessment can share with the assessors and have a back and forth around those key highlights and good practices and where things can be improved. And then an important key deliverable or output is then all the feedback we get from the process. There's the operator feedback as well as the feedback from the assessment team that helps to improve the process and then inform future activities as far as, hopefully as far as the PSMS industry team goes on webinars, workshops, areas to focus, areas where the RP1173 may need improvements or things like that. And it's important to note that we've done the pilot, and we found areas to improve in all of these areas based on the pilot, and I will talk a little bit about that now in our assessment timeline. Back in February, we established all the tools and processes, or at least the framework for the program, and we developed the assessor training and trained the assessors in preparation for the pilot assessment with Colonial Pipeline that was performed at the end of March. We had 5 assessors for 4.5 to 5 days at Colonial, and that included an assessment of their pipeline safety management system at the headquarters, as well as a visit to a field terminal, tank farm and terminal. Now that we're in sort of that we planned it, we did it, and now we're in the check and act phase of our PDCA cycle here as part of the pilot assessment. We're working with Colonial to finalize the reporting and the deliverables. We're working on debriefs, face-to-face debriefs with Colonial and the industry teams to look at all the improvement, all the feedback, the collated feedback from the pilot and come up with an improvement action plan for the process and tools. So, one of the findings from the pilot was that the process we were going through with the assessment team for the maturity scoring and the maturity evaluation did not necessarily align with the industry tool. We built out some process to try to make the methodology for the assessment team sort of rigorous, standardized, repeatable, and we ventured away from the actual true spirit of what the evaluation tool and the maturity scoring is done in the evaluation tool. So we've kind of had to take a step back and do that. We also really need to work on going away from just the conformance-based sort of audit type exercise. We really have got to make sure we work with the assessors and the assessment team through the process to make sure it is collaborative and that expectations are set so that it's a collaborative process where we're reinforcing positives, we're sharing key practices, and we are going beyond just the conformance reporting exercise. So as we go into the second half of this year, we're going to apply the lessons learned and start to do industry outreach, and we also will be doing a second pilot, tentatively planning for October, to test all our improvements and changes, and then toward the end of the year, hopefully we'll have another assessment later in the year, towards the end of the fall, to again sort of do a pilot or do an assessment with the final product as close as we can come. Okay, so that is the third-party assessment and the evaluation tool, sort of an update on all that. Another advanced tool that's in the development with API and the Pipeline SMS industry team is the mentorship program. Really, this is a proactive initiative that's on the part of the industry team to have peer-to-peer discussions to learn from each other and share best practices in implementation and share ways that we can overcome challenges. The industry team would provide volunteer mentors to be available to assist in overall program and specific elements, and API would simply be the conduit to connect the operator with another operator who's requested the mentorship. We're going to maintain a list. The plan is to maintain a list of operators and reach out to the companies to facilitate all the connections. We're going to be, again, API will be the central point, but really it's the Pipeline SMS industry team that will be providing all the mentors and volunteers to help with the implementation challenges and things like that. PipelineSMS.org is going to be the portal for making the request, and more is going to be provided on the website in the coming weeks about how to get this, how to participate, and when this will start and things like that. So that's an overview of all the advanced tools and the mentorship program. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Bobby Liu from the Southern California Gas Company to just do the wrap-up and the closing.
Good morning, everyone. At least here in California, it's good morning. And so Aaron Duke was mentioning about the mentor program, and what I've been doing here for the last couple of years has been doing an informal way of mentoring and mentoring. We're constantly learning from some aspects, and we're also letting people know what we're doing as a best practice. So I think the mentorship program is a great opportunity, and like I said, we've been collaborating with industry-wide folks for the last year or so, and we've learned a lot, and hopefully other people have learned a lot from us as well. So I just want to give a quick shout-out for the mentor program. I think it's very valuable. Going back to the wrap-up, the e-learning right now for API 1173, just for everybody, it's actually free now on the actual pipelinesms.org. I don't know when anybody has been on that website lately, but anybody can download it. Your contractors, your consultants, yourself, any of your peers within your company can all get a free version of that. A year ago, we had to all pay for our individual copy, but now it's all free, so that's great news. And then the actual e-learning module is actually on the API website. This is our second webinar this year, and we had a pipeline safety workshop earlier this year in Tampa. We plan to have a couple more later this year, one of them being the actual workshop, more interactive. And that's probably most likely right now currently in Dallas, Texas. And then the workshops are all based on the survey that was conducted late last year. So we're taking all the information, all the input, and as you can see, this year we've been breaking apart where it's a beginner, today it's a little bit more advanced. So we're trying to make it more specific and more focused on the maturity level you're currently at, so make it as the most bang for your time, I should say. And next slide. Our goal here is to really get into the increased commitment across the entire industry. And for us, it's really understanding benchmarking to really continue our collaboration. And like I said earlier about best practices, the mentorship program is going to be a great opportunity to formalize something that has been done informal across the industry for the last year or so. And finding, I believe David mentioned earlier from Kinder Morgan mentioning the good, the bad, and ugly. And we need to know all of it. The good is constant reinforcement where we're trying to validate, and the bad and the ugly are trying to find things before something significant and catastrophic happens in our industry. And so for us to be proactive, I believe SMS with stakeholder engagement, with continuous improvement and management change all linked together and allow us to be very, very interactive and integrated on trying to do something that's for the better of all the natural gas and pipeline companies in North America. Right now, it's a voluntary approach. I believe voluntary is good. I'm not against having it be more mandated. It gives me a lot of oomph, I would say, across internally and from the regulatory standpoint as well. And since the implementation tool came about last summer, we have been vigorously using it here internally at Southern California Gas Company as well as San Diego Gas and Electric, and leveraging that and also trying to benchmark that across our industry. So I think the implementation tool was a great tool. Before that, we actually used all the different shall and should statements, all 275 of them. But I believe having that implementation tool as well as the evaluation tool has been very, very, very useful for us, and we have definitely taken advantage of it in the last 12 months. And finally, I've personally been on this journey this is into my second year, beginning my third year. So it's taking a long process, and the key word is patience, but constantly driving value and trying to constantly show that you're making a difference is really at the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Bobby. Thank you very much. So if we can open it up to questions again, that'd be great. If any of the speakers can comment on this question that was sent in through the chat, from your company's perspective, the question was about using homegrown tools for risk management or third-party tools. Any comments from the speaker group?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I think that risk management is very susceptible to the differences in types of risk. So depending on the type of risk will depend very much on whether you develop your own tool that's specific to your circumstances or whether you purchase something that's off the shelf. So if you're looking at the risk of explosion and you want to know explosion radiuses, you're probably better going and buying a tool off the shelf. If you're looking more at enterprise risk, then using the standard risk matrices of consequence multiplied by likelihood, you can get a number of different viewpoints of that, and most organizations will probably develop something that portrays that risk in a way that they're happy portraying it. So they will define their own levels of tolerance for consequence and for likelihood and fit it into that matrices and then have their own essentially risk forms. So I believe that as I was reading through, the person was asking if there was like a one-stop shop for risk management tools. The short answer to that is I do not believe that there is. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it was something that was thrown out from on the chat, so yeah, that sounds good. Anybody else? David or Shannon, any comments on the tools and whether they're homegrown or third party or anything?
In the experiences I've had, this is Shannon Gutterson speaking. Generally, we've ended up developing our own homegrown tools, and then we look at trying to get some alignment with some third-party applications. We're trying to get it into a database as opposed to picking something up off the shelf. So generally, in the company I'm with and in my past experiences, we generally look at building them in-house.
And I would agree, a little way the same way, because we're also regulated by British Columbia Oil and Gas and, of course, the NEB. So we have to kind of put three of them together, so ours is a little bit homegrown as well.
Yeah, and that's actually an excellent point, David, is just because of the nature of our business, we're across a lot of different jurisdictions, a lot of different regulators. Not all of them are focused on management system requirements, but some of them are still now starting to queue up on it. And it's a challenge to have something that works for all the little nuances that some of them want.
There was also a question on the thing, just to paraphrase it, we are from a Canadian gas company, and a question about the I'm assuming it's the benchmark, the evaluation tool, and the tools being developed by the PSMS industry team. Does the benchmarking ask of the tool applicable to Canadian industry, or it needs to be redeveloped for Canada? The tools that are developed by the Pipeline SMS industry team are specifically based on the Pipeline SMS industry in-team maturity model that was developed and RP 1173. So as far as that goes, they're fit for purpose. If an organization is using RP 1173 and referring back to the industry maturity model, they would work anywhere. They're kind of agnostic of location. So that's really where that's at. Now, as far as trying to translate that into a different standard or into a different maturity model, that would be an individual operator that would have to make that determination. However, we do have companies that work on both sides of the border, and we're trying to look at ways that we can be complementary to the management system requirements in Canada. So just so you know. And then also, as far as the webinar materials, the PowerPoint presentation session will be available on pipeline-sms.org after conclusion of the webinar, not tomorrow, but at some point it will be available. All the materials are available on the website. So there's another question that just came through on the chat. Based on the survey results, it showed that there were minimal implementation challenges relating to documentation and record keeping. And from the speaker's perspective, is that because people don't find it challenging or because they've already focused on or completed that element? Any perspectives on that?
Shannon Gutterson here. I think the reason that we're not seeing it as a high level is that as part of the journey of trying to get into management systems, my initial thoughts for my take on it would be is that they're actually focusing on elements that they see as a bit more of a challenge, or they're not quite there yet in terms of trying to improve some of their documentation or records keeping. They're maybe a bit more focused on establishing some components of the management system as opposed to worrying about a certain level of documentation or records. But that's just one take on that.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. Okay, so that's we're at 12:30-ish, and that would conclude it. Being that there's no other questions on the phone or through the chat, I would like to say thank you to all the speakers that were involved today. So that's thanks to Dave Merck at API, Angie Kohler with Colonial, Shannon Gutterson with TransCanada, David Toth with Kinder Morgan, Justine Brubaker at Marathon Pipeline, and Bobby Liu at Southern California Gas. I'd like to say thanks, and we look forward to hearing from you all. If you are, again, just to reiterate, if you're interested in getting involved, you can email the pipeline industry team at pipelinesms@api.org. Visit the website to find out the latest updates, and thanks again for all your time. Thank you.